All right. We'll let people in as they come in, but I think we'll get started now. Welcome to all, and thanks for attending. I'm Nick Bogert. I'm on the Region of Three Oaks Museum Board, and helping me present the program is Garth, Garth Taylor, who heads the School of American Music in Three Oaks. This is a pretty complicated technical thing. There's Garth waving. Hi, Troubadour. Fairly technically complicated for me. So if there are a few hiccups along the way, pardon me, but I'm going to do my best to make this work. Garth will be joined by Tara Dodge, Daniel Rodriguez, and Dan Moser to bring this program to life. They'll be singing the songs of the pioneers. They'll perform a dozen selections tonight, and I'm hoping, I have my son trying to log on to this, although it was a little bit of a late adaptation. He's going to try and put the lyrics into the chat function so you can follow along. Music, as it does for us today, fulfilled many roles for those who migrated to Michigan and the other Northwest territories in the 1820s and 30s. Michigan fever, they called it. In 1820, there were only 8,900 non-Indigenous people in the state, but 10 years later, that number had nearly quadrupled to 32,000. And 10 years after that, Michigan's non-native population boomed to 212,000. Michigan public land sales rose from 147,000 acres to almost 500,000 in 1834, just 4 years later. Some pioneers may have been lured westward by song. Michigan IA was an extended jingle aimed at those pondering a move from New England.
Farmers who'd like to change your lot, who've spunk enough to travel beyond your native spot and leave behind the country where mom and dad do stay, and come and take your fortune in Michigan IA. Talk of Vermont, what place is that? It's sure the girls are pretty and the cattle very fat, but who would like the mountains, the clouds and snow to stay, when you can buy a prairie in Michigan IA? This land is quite productive and everything for use. There's plenty of good cider and lots of maple juice. The grapes, the plums, the cherries, the apples grow this way, and quite delicious peaches in Michigan IA. Rivers, creeks, and great lakes abound with plenty fish, and in the woods are turkeys that make a tasty dish. The bear, the elk, the forests, the buck and fawn do stray. There's game just for the taking in Michigan IA. Farmers with hungry hearts like me, and elbow grease aplenty to cut the forest tree. Come buy a quarter section, and I'll be bound to say you'll ne'er regret coming to Michigan IA.
Now, once the settlers made their way to Michigan IA, job one was to clear the land to accommodate first a lodging and then agriculture. Many folks sold the lumber that they cut from their land. Henry Chamberlain became Three Oaks' first resident after getting a contract with the Michigan Central Railroad to provide cordwood. And even before that, Chamberlain had been lumbering in inland areas, and bringing his logs to New Buffalo for shipment. In some parts of Michigan, logs were floated to the lakeshore on rivers, but the Galeen, sadly, was too winding and filled with snags to allow for that. Still is. As a result, Henry Chamberlain wrote, the work of loading wood was hard. The placing of it on the scow, the poling of the scow down to the mouth of the river, and the pulling of it out to the vessel by a line, the lifting of the wood to the deck of the vessel. And sometimes, when the current was strong out of the mouth of the river, it was a difficult matter to turn the boat against the current. I at one time worked at this business for 48 consecutive hours, stopping only long enough to eat my meals. There were lots of sawmills in the area. An 1870s atlas shows 4 piers in Chickaming Township, whose primary purpose was to ship lumber out. Going right to left on this graphic, there was Greenbush Pier in Sawyer. You may be forgiven if that name sounds familiar to you. Pikes Pier in Harbert, Wilkinson Pier in Lakeside, and Union Pier in, now you can probably guess where that one was. A little further north in Michigan's White Pine Belt, lumbering was huge, with lumberjacks living in vast camps, felling trees at a furious rate, drinking and singing in their bunkhouses at night about the rigors of their work and the squalor of their accommodations. Well, you've heard Michigan IA. Michigan IO was a favorite with the lumberjacks.
'Twas early in the season, in the fall of '63, a preacher of the gospel, he stepped up to me. He says, my clever fellow, how would you like to go and spend a winter lumbering in Michigan, IO? So boldly I stepped up to him, and to him I did say, my going there a-lumbering depends upon the pay. If you will pay good wages and passage to and fro, I'll spend a winter lumbering in Michigan, IO. Oh yes, I'll pay good wages and pay your passage out, provided you'll sign papers that you will stay the route. But if you play the slackard and swear it's home you'll go, there's no pay for your passage home from Michigan, IO. And with that line of flattery, he gathered up a train, some 25 or 30 young able-bodied men. We had a pleasant voyage to where we did not know, and went ashore in Saginaw in Michigan, IO. that God-forsaken country called Michigan, I-O. To that God-forsaken country called Michigan, I-O.
So a contrasting view of Michigan from Michigan IA to Michigan IO. By the way, Michigan IO was initially recorded by a fellow named Alan Lomax, who began recording old folk songs. He's got a primitive tape recorder there in his lap. He began recording them in the 1930s, and his recordings are now in the Library of Congress. Michigan IO was modeled on the song Canada IO. Lots of Canadian lumberjacks worked in Michigan camps. And what you find with pioneer songs and folk music generally is that the songs are shared and they evolve. Songs that were once sung in the forests of Canada or New England make their way to Michigan, and the lyrics are often adapted to the new location. Though lumberjacks sometimes mocked farmers as mossbacks who were living dull, routine lives, many in the lumber camps were stashing away their wages, hoping to buy some land and work it. You get a sense of that from the logging song, "Save Your Money When You're Young."
Come all you jolly good shanty boys, come hear me tell my tale. A story I'll relate to you, a story to beguile. A story I will tell you that many men have told. It's save your money when you're young, you'll need it when you're old. Well, if you are a single man, I'll tell you what to do. Just find a fair young maiden who'll be steadfast and true. Find that fair young maiden who's not so overbold, who'll have you when you're young and give you comfort when you're old. And if you are a married man, I'll tell you what to do. Support your wife and family, that's what you're sworn to do. Away from barrooms where the rum is kept and sold. For all they want's your money, boys, you'll need it when you're old. One time I was a shanty boy, oh wasn't I the lad? I spent my money foolishly, just like I had gone mad. Now I'm old and feeble and went out in the cold. Oh, save your money, boys, because you'll need it when you're old.
Again, the lumber camps and the lumberjacks were generally north of our area. Here, for the most part, once the trees were cut down, that was a sign that farming could begin, and agriculture did indeed dominate the economy of these parts. In fact, the idea for this program came to me while I was working in the Chickaming Community Garden hauling mulch. I was singing a song in my head and thinking about how much easier music can make work, especially repetitive tasks. A farmer's livelihood depended on industriousness, not only on the part of the farmer, but also of his family. You don't work, you don't eat was pretty much the rule. So here's the man who wouldn't hoe corn.
Went to the field and he
By the 1880s, the farmer's lot was growing harder than ever. As described in the book American Bonds, How Credit Shaped a Nation, many farmers in the late 1800s were effectively reduced to debt peonage, charged exorbitant rates by local banks, charged high rates by shippers, buying supplies at steep prices. They organized into alliances or co-ops. Their frustration and the budding collective movement was expressed in the song, "The Farmer is the Man."
When the farmer comes to town with his wagon broken down, oh, the farmer is the man who feeds them all. If you'll only look and see, then I think you will agree that the farmer is the man who feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man, buys on credit till the fall. Then they take him by the hand and they lead him to the land, and the merchant is the one who gives it all. When the doctor hangs around while the butcher cuts his pound, it's the farmer is the man who feeds them all. And the preacher and the cook go a-strolling by the brook, it's the farmer is the man who feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man, buys on credit till the fall. Though his family comes to town with the wagon broken down, it's the farmer is the man who feeds them all. When the banker says he's broke and the merchant's up in smoke, it's the farmer is the man who feeds them all. It would put them to the test if the farmer took a rest, it's the farmer is the man who feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man, lives on credit till the fall. And his clothes are wearing thin, his condition is a sin, they forget that he's the man who feeds them all.
As I said, all members of the farming family had to pitch in to make ends meet. While the Northwest Territories Act had mandated universal education be provided in Michigan, school did not begin until late in the growing year because children were needed to help with the crops. While the men did the hunting and the lion's share of the crop raising, women kept vegetable gardens for family consumption and had numerous other responsibilities. Indeed, the phrase "a woman's work is never done," while often still true, really did apply in frontier homes. Pioneer J.B. Crosby, writing in the Three Oaks Acorn in the early 20th century, looked back. In the house, the women folks had a strenuous time as it looks now. There was spinning, weaving, making yarn for sock and mittens, the cutting and making of all garments for the whole family by hand, sewing even to making the shirts and fine bosoms for the men, and backstitching the seams of the men's pants using thread waxed with beeswax. There was soap making, and once or twice a year, the making of tallow dips and molded candles, the curing of the pork, making sausage, chopping the meat by hand, and filling skins with it. Many women, besides, had the milking to do, calves to feed, butter to make, and chickens to raise. The pioneer woman's lot was described humorously in "There Was an Old Man Who Lived in the Woods."
There was an old man who lived in a wood, as you can plainly see, who said he could do more work in a day than his wife could do in 3. If this be true, the woman, she said, then this you must allow. Tomorrow you stay home instead, while I go drive the plow. So you must milk Miss Tidy the cow, for fear she will go dry, and you must feed the baby pigs that are within the sty, and you must watch the speckled hen, for fear she'll lay away, and then you'll reel the spool of yarn that I spun yesterday.
The woman took her staff
in her hand and went to drive the plow. The old man took the pail in his hand and went to milk the cow. But Tidy hinged and Tidy flinched, Tidy shook her nose, and Tidy kicked the man so hard that blood ran to his toes. It's tidy hey and tidy ho, and tidy please stand still. If ever I milk this cow again, 'twill be against my will. And then he sought the speckled hen, lest she should lay astray, and clean forgot to reel the yarn his wife spun yesterday.
He swore by the sun, the moon, and the stars, the green leaves on the tree, that he could do more work in a day than his wife could do in 3. He swore by all the leaves on the trees and all the stars in heaven, his wife could do more work in a day than he could do in 7. His wife could do more work in a day than he could do in 7.
Now, lots of duties in pioneer America were done collectively. There were house raisings and barn raisings, after which the host who'd enlisted neighbors' labor would pay them back with an evening of food and song. Men would also hold husking bees. Sometimes those were competitive and intense, but other times they were more mellow and involved lots of singing. Women held quilting and sewing bees, and singing was often a part of those affairs, with most songs being about love. The words of the next song came from, or at least were adapted from, the diary of a woman named Sarah Price in the mid-1800s. Her husband was an engineer for the Illinois-Michigan Canal, and her descriptions of the troubles of keeping a pioneer home are poignant.
One day I was walking, I heard her complaining, and saw an old woman, the picture of gloom. She gazed at the mud on her doorstep. 'Twas raining, and this was her song as she wielded her broom. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double, and nothing is as I would wish it to be. There's way too much worriment goes to a bonnet, and way too much ironing goes to a shirt. There's nothing that pays for the time you waste on it, and nothing that lasts us but trouble and dirt. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double, and nothing is as I would wish it to be. There's worms in the cherries and slugs on the roses, and ants in the sugar and mice in the pies. The rubbish of spiders no mortal supposes, and ravaging roses and damaging flies. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double, and nothing is as I would wish it to be. Last night in my dreams I was stationed forever on a far little rock in the midst of the sea. My one chance of life was a ceaseless endeavor to sweep off the waves as they swept over me. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble.
they dwindle and prices they double, and nothing is as I would wish it to be.
Alas, 'twas no dream, ahead I beheld it. I see I am helpless, my fate to avert. She laid down her room, her apron she folded. She lay down and died and was buried in dirt. Oh, life is a toil and love is a trouble. Beauty will fade and riches will flee. Pleasures they dwindle and prices they double, and nothing is as I would wish it to be.
Life on land, as you can tell by that last song, was hard, a 12-month slog. And for many, life on the water seemed a glamorous alternative. Great Lakes shipping was vital in supplying many of Michigan's frontier communities. Goods often shipped out of Buffalo, New York. Lakeshore communities were among the first to spring up in this area. Indeed, it was a Buffalo-based wayward lake captain, Wessel Whitaker by name, whose ship ran aground near Grand Beach. He founded New Buffalo in 1835, and we had a student from New Buffalo High recreate the scene of Whitaker's shipwreck for us a couple of years ago. Whitaker envisioned the spot at the mouth of the Galeen River as a great lake port that would rival Chicago. It did not happen, and Whitaker died penniless in 1841, the same year that iron ore was discovered in the Mesabi Range, Minnesota and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So ore boats and logging ships crisscrossed the Great Lakes along with those supply ships. Many who had sailed the oceans out of New England or other countries transferred their skills and their songs to the Great Lakes. In 1841, Richard Henry Dana wrote in his memoir, "A song is as necessary to sailors as a drum and fife is to a soldier." Recent news stories say that sea shanties are coming back into vogue, the soundtrack of 2021. Well, I'm not so sure about that, but the songs of the sea do go way back. Egyptian fishermen were known to sing as they worked as far back as 2500 BC. Galley slaves rode to drums. Sea shanties of the 1800s were often rhythmic in nature to help ships' crews working in unison to haul lines. So here is Haul Away Joe.
In Buffalo, I met a gal as fair as any daisy Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, Joe. I had a drink, I lost my coin, and then I lost Miss Daisy Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, Joe. The mate came into Tony's bar and said there's work next morning, Timmy. Enabled men come follow me, we're sailing with the John and Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, oh, once I sailed the oceans wide with Chinese silks and spices, Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, but now I'm on a Great Lakes pub and sleep with hungry lices, Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, away, all away, we'll all away together, Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away, away, all away, we'll offer sunny weather, Timmy. Way all away, we'll all away.
Now, the call and response nature of that song, by the way, is common in African songs. And Africans on ship's crews had brought call and response to sea shanties. There was, by the way, a lot of cross-pollination between the seaman and the lumberjack. Because logging was largely a winter occupation, many lumberjacks worked ships in the summertime. And of course, lumberjacks would help load logs into ships in the spring. So some of their songs sound alike. There's a chanty called the Sailor's Alphabet. A is for the anchor we carry on our bow, B is the bowsprit, C is the capstan, etc. And there's a lumberjack's alphabet song as well. A is for axes, which all of you know. B is for boys who can use them. C is for chopping, and so forth. Work songs tend to be long to pass the time. Anyone who recalls a long school bus trip where the musical selection was 100 bottles of beer on the wall can understand this concept. As noted earlier, the discovery of iron ore in the Mesabi Range brought many ore boats through this area in the late 1800s, taking their cargo to Chicago for refining. Here is red iron ore.
Come all ye bold sailors who follow the lakes, on iron ore vessels your living to make. I shipped in Chicago, bid adieu to the shore, bound away to Escanaba for red iron ore. 'Twas middle September, the 17th day. $2.25 was all they would pay. At dawn Monday morning, the Bridgeport did take the E.C. Roberts out onto the lake. To Saginaw Bay did the swift Roberts ride, with dark and deep water a-rollin' her side. And then to Port Huron the Roberts did go, where the tugboat Kate Williams took us in her tow. We sailed her to Cleveland, made fast stem and stern, and over a bottle we spin a big yarn. Here's health to the Roberts, she's strong and she's true, and health to the bold boys who make up her crew.
Let me just add again, I said at the beginning of the program, but some of you hadn't joined us, that if you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the chat room, and we'll get to those later. I'll try and answer the historical ones. Garth may chime in on some of the musical questions, and he also knows quite a bit of history of some of these songs as well. To get back to the story, railroads soon joined shipping as a way to move goods and people in Michigan. And of course, the Michigan Central tracks were built right through Galene, Three Oaks, and New Buffalo in 1849. In fact, the shot you're seeing is in front of the old freight house in Three Oaks, near where the tracks cross Elm Street. Laying and aligning track is another job where rhythmic songs help workers apply their muscle in unison. I've Been Working on the Railroad is perhaps the best known railroad song, but close behind is the musical saga of John Henry.
When John Henry was a little baby, sitting on his daddy's knee, he said the Big Bend tunnel on the C&O line gonna be the death of me, oh Lord, gonna be the death of me. Well, the captain said to John Henry, bring me your hammer around and beat that steam drill on the job. Walk that steel on down, oh Lord, walk that steel on down. Then John Henry, he said to the captain, you can lay your money on me, I will beat that John Henry started on the right side. Steam drill started on the left. Before I let that steam drill beat me down, I'll hammer myself to death, oh Lord, I'll hammer myself to death. Well, the sun was shining hot and burning. There weren't no breeze at all. And as the sweat run down like a river down a hill, John Henry let his hammer fall, oh Lord, John Henry let his hammer fall. John Henry was hammering on the mountain. His hammer was a striking fire, and he drove so hard that he broke his heart. He laid his hammer and he died, oh Lord, laid down his hammer and he died. Well, the man that invented the steam drill, he thought he was mighty fine, but John Henry drove his hammer 15 feet, and the steam drill only made 9, oh Lord, the steam drill only made 9. So they took John Henry to the graveyard and buried him in the sand. Now every engineer that roars on by says, there lies a steel driving man, oh Lord, there lies a steel driving man.
The American poet and one-time Harvard resident Carl Sandberg was a lover and performer of folk songs and collected huge numbers of them. In his book, The American Songbag, Sandberg quoted an old railroad hand who said he spent a lot of time on railroad talk. What was that, he was asked? Oh, whiskey and women, higher wages and shorter hours. Here's Mama, Have You Heard the News?
Mama, 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 have you heard the news? Papa got killed on the CBQ. Shut your eyes and hold your breath. We'll all draw a pension on Papa's death. On Papa's death, on Papa's death. We'll all draw a pension on Papa's death. Early in the morning when it looked like rain, around the curve came a gravel train. On the train was Casey Jones, a good old rounder, but he's dead and gone. He's dead and gone, he's dead and gone, a good old rounder, he's dead and gone. In a scramble past the station flag, he rolled 30 minutes late with the U.S. mail. Casey's fate was then foretold. He'll roll into Canton or he'll leave the rail. Leave the rail, leave the rail. Roll into Canton or he'll leave the rail. Casey Jones's family heard of his death. Casey's daughter fell upon her knees. Mama, mama, how can it be that Papa got killed on the old IC? Hush your mouth and hold your breath. We'll all draw a pension on Papa's death. On Papa's death, on Papa's death. We'll all draw a pension on Papa's death. On Papa's death, on Papa's death. We'll all draw a pension on Papa's death.
Now, many of the songs that you've heard were meant to accompany work, provide tempo, and make the time spent on repetitive tasks go faster. But then, as now, there were lots of songs sung to celebrate the end of the workday or the work week, to raise a ruckus, and that is the name of our final selection.
Come along, everybody, come along. Come on, shining bright.
So if you have any questions, again, I'm hoping you type them in the chat function, and Garth and I would be happy to respond. I'll give you a little bit of time to do that and do my obligatory spiel on behalf of the museum. Most of you here tonight are already members, but I'd like to urge others among you to join up. You can become an individual member for just $10, while a family membership is a mere $20. And here's the address if you want to mail in a check, and our email address if you have further questions. The museum itself, by the way, will reopen on May 1st, assuming public health rules allow it. And of course, we put on programs like this one throughout the year. I don't see any questions just yet, but maybe I can ask Garth. I'm going to unmute you, Garth, if you will unmute yourself anyway. I mean, you did the research. I basically gave Garth the sort of general areas of the songs that I was interested in, the railroads, sea captains, that sort of thing. But Garth, when you were looking at them, you found multiple versions of each song, I think, right? I mean, small variations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Most of these work songs develop. An idea would come from somewhere, like someone's manuscript, but these work settings, people were just coming and going from different places. And when they would come to a place, they would learn a song. And then when they go to some other place, they take the song with them. Then what happens is that song develops its own tradition and its own words. And then what happens is some folklorist from a local university comes by and makes a recording of that person's version of that song, and then declares it to be the original authentic version. Then someone like Carl Sandberg comes along and discovers that there are 12 authentic versions of John Henry or any of these other songs. And so consequently, when you look them up in a book now, particularly these compilation books, you'll find something like 30 verses, some of which are repetitive and some of which go off into completely different directions. That sometimes there's a lot of overlap, and then other times there's just verses that go off in all different directions. So it's really fascinating to try to figure out which one. I tended to kind of develop a consensus version that was short and had the verses that I liked the best and that I thought held together as a story, and just do it that way. And you know, Lord knows somebody's going to discover this manuscript in a time capsule somewhere 100 years from now and say, oh, we've discovered the authentic version of one of these 12 tunes. So I'm looking forward to that.
Taylor templates, right.
Yeah, right.
Somebody says just because they were singing Canada-I-O, why apply it to Michigan? Was that just an easy way to get a rhyme? I mean, do you have a feel for that?
Well, no, the director of the project said that he wanted songs that applied to Michigan, and if we could, but it wasn't. But that was actually a version of that song that was sung in the logging camps. It turns out that there's a pretty hefty genre of books of logging camp songs. And they're specialized by state. So you can find books from logging camp songs from Maine, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then various parts of Canada. And so there really was a Canadian version of the song, a Michigan version of the song. When I worked with a theater group in Minneapolis right after college, we found a Minnesota version of the same song, except it was pitched not to people from, I think the Michigan-I-O was pitched to people from Vermont. I think that's the place names that are in there. The one in Minnesota was pitched to people in Sweden about what a great place Minnesota was. It was called Oleana, but it was basically the same song.
Somebody makes the observation that Irish sea shanties may be really popular right now because of the really terrific movie Fisherman's Friends. These logging camp songs, do you know of or recommend any feature movies that highlight or celebrate these songs? The history is so wonderful. I don't, but but
Well, the sea shanties are, I mean, another reason that they might be popular is that they're very literate. The language in the sea shanties is generally quite clever. The rhyme schemes are quite good. And the melodies tend to be based on the same kind of Irish, Scottish traditions that a lot of our folk music and bluegrass music is based on. So it's going to be familiar sound, comforting sound with really good language. And the Irish shanties come from a time in American history when actually all of these songs do, but it comes from a time when work was considered it was to honor the dignity of labor. Unlike songs now, which work songs now are usually sarcastic about labor, like take this job and shove it kind of stuff. But the sea shanties are from a period where labor was considered an honorable undertaking. And they're mostly songs about getting from here to there and working together. And you don't even find songs about, the sea shanties. They never, singers of those never got involved in unionization drives or anything. So you don't find songs that are about even complaining about work conditions. They're just nice songs with a good melody, and it's got a good beat, and you can dance to it.
yeah, and as you might imagine, both on a ship and in a lumber camp, there probably weren't any other sources of entertainment, really, right? You had to make up. You could probably work on your song quite a bit.
There was a lot of time. There was a lot of time to perfect those tunes, and there was in some of the stuff that I read, there always was a position. There always was a job open on the boat for a person who was a good singer and who could make up good lyrics, even if they weren't that strong, or even if they couldn't, pull that rope down quite as hard as everybody else. So that, but that it was considered if you could just get a good singer who could keep a good beat, that would keep everybody else on the beat also, and so they would be able to pull more consistently on those rope lines, and that sail would go up or down much more quickly and smoothly.
I guess we're out of questions, and we're trying to keep these to about an hour, and that's just about exactly what we've done here, I guess. I guess